era when it comes to space exploration. With milestones like Chandrayaan and Gaganyaan, we've shown the world what's possible. But the question is, can India rise to the challenge and become a global leader in space innovation, competing with the likes of SpaceX?
Well, absolutely. In fact, for our next session, our next speaker has been at the heart of this very mission. As chairperson of the IIN Space, Pawan Goenka is leading the charge to propel India into the forefront of space technology. Today, he'll be sharing his thoughts on how India can make its mark on the global space stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in welcoming Pawan Goenka, who will be in conversation with Senior Executive Editor, Input Times Now and Mirror Now, Madhav Das Gopalakrishnan. Madhav, can we have you? Okay, there you are.
We'll hand it over to you, Madhav, now.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much, Mr. Pawan Goenka, for joining us today. As we all know, India is on the cusp of going from space as something that was entirely an area managed by the government to now an area where more private players are going to be engaged. In space is going to be a key factor in driving that. And the big question on everyone's minds, as we've seen the stupendous success of SpaceX that has, fired off everyone's imagination globally, what really do we need to do for us to be able to enable an environment where we perhaps create an Indian SpaceX in the future? We have the talent, we have the ecosystem, we have a very passionate Indian audience or citizens who are very, very interested in this area. But what do we need to do to actually deliver another Indian SpaceX?
Thank you, Madhav, and thank you for having me here today. I normally talk about space to the audience that is connected to space. Today, perhaps I have an audience that may not be very familiar with what's happening in the space sector. So I won't directly address the question that when India may have its own SpaceX, because that gets asked often. I'll let the audience judge towards the end of this program on where we are headed and whether we will have a SpaceX. So I think just to give you a little bit of a background, India opened up the space sector only in 2020, in the middle of COVID, to allow the private sector to come in and play a major role in space. As you said, that till that time it was primarily ISRO that was involved in the space sector, and ISRO has made us proud. If you look at that video right there, this is what we all feel good about and clap when we land on the moon. But the second thing that's happening now is how the private sector is coming in. In the last 3.5 years, a lot has happened in terms of how private sector is playing in the space. For example, we had only one startup in space sector about 3-4 years ago. Now we have 250. We have a lot of investment coming in the sector. We have a lot of technical work happening in the sector. But I'll sort of come back and talk about what we have achieved and let you come in and ask me the next question. But by the end of the half an hour, we should probably get an answer to when India might have its own space, whether India should even worry about having a SpaceX.
Okay, but that's very interesting because, there are many lessons to be learned from, the big companies, whether it's SpaceX, whether it's Blue Origin, etc. What are the lessons that India can learn to accelerate growth in this area?
So I think that's a very, very good question. See, space is not a business of instant gratification. It requires a lot of perseverance, requires a lot of technology work, requires a lot of investment. So if you look at SpaceX, for example, we all know about the success of SpaceX, but we don't know what it took for SpaceX to get here. They started in about 2002. They were almost bankrupt before they had the successful launch of Falcon in about 2008 or 9. $100 million was brought in by Elon Musk as his personal money. And up till now, about $8 billion has been invested in SpaceX by various investors. I think it's turning profitable just about now, after 20 years, though the valuation of SpaceX is $210 billion. So one thing that is required is heavy investment coming from personal, private, or the government. In fact, government of USA, through NASA, has given at least $5 to $6 billion worth of business to SpaceX. So that's one of the things that we will have to do, that how does the government provide the financial support to the private sector, and how does government provide business or demand to the private sector. The second thing that SpaceX has done extremely well, that very few companies have managed to do, is advanced technology way beyond what was the state of the art in 2002. The Raptor engine that they have launched with the Starship is absolutely world class. No one has it. The Falcon that they did the first time reusable rocket, nobody had done that in the world up until now. Nobody. They're the first company to do that, private or government. So it also success is coming from very cutting edge technology development that is SpaceX has done. Right? And third one is, of course, to have kind of an appetite that Mr. Elon Musk has for taking risk, setting very big, bold goals that many of us will think the man is crazy, right? But he sets the goal and achieves the goal by his belief in himself and his team, and his ability to muster support for himself in all
right.
box.
One interesting aspect, though, that that in space and the entire environment has, is that earlier space was directly under the central government. Even the structure of it is that it comes directly under the Prime Minister's office, and that's been the case for many decades. But now, do you see that the state governments too can have a role in actually fostering this ecosystem and ensuring that there is more private investment? What are the steps that are being taken for state governments to get more involved?
So see, state government has a role in two ways. One, government today is the biggest user of the outcome of space, whether it happens in terms of satellites and communication devices or navigation devices, which is done mostly by the security agencies, including defense. And second, in terms of using the data from space to translate into information that gets used in our daily life, whether it's agriculture, communication, navigation, disaster monitoring, marine, all of these, right? States are very big user of these things. So what the states need to do is perhaps understand a little more of how space can help running of the various programs that they have and make them more efficient and more effective, right? The second thing that the states can do is to attract space companies to come in and set up manufacturing in their state, just like they do for many other investments. So right now, at least two states, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, have come forward setting up a manufacturing cluster, investing significant amount of money, providing land for it, coming out with policies to support manufacturing in their state. And many other states are now looking at it with the private sector growing. So to attract that private sector to set up the manufacturing. And third is to create an ecosystem for startups through incubation centers that again many states are doing. Karnataka, of course, is the heart of space industry, with the headquarters of ISRO being in Karnataka, and also many of the startups are set up in and around Karnataka. So that, again, Karnataka is quite active in supporting space.
Right. No, space has so many applications, cutting across sectors, whether we're talking about weather, we're talking about agriculture, remote sensing can be applied in virtually every sector, apart from, of course, communication, so on and so forth. As we move towards privatization, and of course, there's no denying that, making things commercially viable is also very, very important. But how do we ensure that there is a balance between the need to privatize, the need for commercial applications on the one hand, when we come to our technology, that it is also used for the larger developmental goals, which may not be as, say, commercially attractive for the private players to invest in and to be engaged in? So
let me put it in perspective, Madhav. The global space economy today is about $440 billion. Many people don't know that. India is only about $8 billion. That is just about 2% of global economy. But India, in terms of technology, is shoulder to shoulder with most advanced countries in terms of what we can do. Again, you can see all these videos in front of you. We are not behind anyone. Where we need to do more is the commercial application of space. The type of application where the government comes in and does things for the social requirement or for defense requirement, security requirements, is being done reasonably well. We can do more, but we are doing reasonably well. Where we're not doing enough is the commercial application of space. How do the people sitting here in this room see space as something that can help them do what they're doing better, right? And not just look at the Chandrayaan landing on the moon. That's exciting. That's a lot of value. It brings us a lot of pride, brings a lot of technology. But what can happen to the data that comes down to the satellites? What can happen to the communication that we can do through the satellite, and how can you use it in your business? So you have to think beyond what you have been thinking. And I can tell you that many businesses will find that space can play a very important role in them. And then only the commercial cycle will start. That will not start simply by government providing some services using space data or space applications. The private sector has to come in both in terms of developing applications, which is beginning to happen, and also in terms of using these applications to gainfully use the outcome of space data to make your business better in terms of providing better service, providing better efficiency, understanding where to mine, understanding your leakages in the pipes, and so on and so forth.
So what are these gaps? So what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that even though we're doing fairly well when it comes to space technology, Chandrayaan 3 success, so on and so forth, there are still some technological gaps or gaps of access or providing this technology. Where are these gaps that you think?
Gaps in what?
In terms of actually providing space technology, when it comes to space technology itself, where are these gaps where you feel that it would be more successful?
See, GSO orbit, where we have several for communication, each satellite costs 2,000 crores upwards. Okay, each satellite, right? Technology that we have is reasonably good. We can launch satellites. We have all our launch vehicles. We have very excellent launch center. What we don't have enough of is number of satellites that we have. Okay, so today for navigation, for example, we have something called NAVIC. I don't know how many people know about NAVIC here, which is similar to GPS that everybody knows about. Now in NAVIC, we have today only 4 or 5 active satellites. We need to launch 5 more for NAVIC to become as effective as GPS is, at least in the Indian Ocean region, right? Which is in the plan. But till that happens, NAVIC cannot be as effective as GPS is for civilian application. For strategic application, defense, it's doing its job, but for civilian, it cannot be. So that plan is there. So putting in more. If you look at the data, Earth observation, as we call it, that is getting data around India. That means, again, many people won't know that every point on Earth is being watched. We are all being watched right now by some satellite somewhere, but it's a Chinese satellite is watching us, what we're doing. We have satellites for Earth observation of various kinds, ocean, Earth, mountains, but the accuracy that we have is not as much as is required today for the applications, right? And that's because, again, we have perhaps not put in as much investment as we need to, and that is perhaps because all of this is happening only by the government. If private sector comes in and starts putting in investment, and not investment for the sake of doing something good, but investment for the sake of making money, because I won't expect private sector to do things only for social cause. It has to have a business justification. If they start coming in and put in more investment into launching satellites that will give you a better resolution of the data that you create, then you can get much better outcome. So, for example, InSpace has just floated a tender for private sector to come in and launch 12 satellites that will give data better resolution than what we have today available to us. And about 9 companies have applied for it. That just happened last week. And pretty soon we'll finalize who will get the contract. And after that, they will launch the satellite. It will take 2 to 3 years for it to happen, but then we'll be much better off than what we are today. So that's the second part on how do we get better data. Third thing that we are lacking is access to what we call spectrum, frequency spectrum. Okay? This is something that is given by a central international body, and satellites are at various points on the sky, and not 2 satellites can come at the same point. So this body assigns satellites to come to a country. India does not have enough of these frequencies, and we need to apply for more, get more frequencies so that we can launch more satellites to take care of all our requirements.
Right. One of the things that I was also coming across is that there's been a phenomenal increase in the number of startups in this area. Over 200 startups that are now there, which is a 5-time increase in about 2 years. But one of the things that startups talk about is that the lack of adequate testing facilities. How are you planning to approach this problem?
I think we are taking care of it slowly. Again, there's no overnight solution, but it's happening. I'll tell you what we are doing. But let me tell you in terms of startups, we have come quite far, as I said, in terms of numbers. The highest valuation for a space startup right now is about $500 million. And I'm waiting for the first unicorn, and hopefully it will happen in the next year or so.
Hopefully.
But what the startups need, as you said rightly, one is demand. I talked about it at length. And second is the infrastructure, the ecosystem. Now today, ISRO has world-class infrastructure. No matter what you talk about, they have everything that you can do. But of course, ISRO has it for their own internal use. Now, as per the new Indian space policy that got announced in April of last year, ISRO is mandated through InSpace to make this ecosystem available to the private sector. And InSpace is playing that role of facilitating how private sector can use this ecosystem, right? So there's a process established, and quite a bit of it has already happened, where almost every facility of ISRO is accessible to private sector at a, let's say, subsidized price. Okay? Second thing that we are doing is that InSpace itself is sort of creating infrastructure for use only of the private sector, not ISRO. We have already done phase 1 in Ahmedabad. Phase 2 is in the process of being approved. Once that is done, then we'll have 75-80% of what they need available through InSpace directly. And for the remaining 25-30%, we will go to ISRO. And third is that as the space sector grows, private sector will come forward and put infrastructure for use by others. That is not started in a big way yet. We will still need some more demand to happen. Of course, we are putting the infrastructure before demand is there. Because if we waited for demand, then it will be a catch-22 situation. But private sector will not put the infrastructure till demand is there. But I'm sure it will happen, as it is seen in European countries, as it is seen in USA.
Right, and as the sector grows and as the plans, of course, ambitious as they are, and rightly so perhaps, but what about the need for specialized, skilled manpower in this area? Do we have that kind of infrastructure to produce the persons who are perhaps trained adequately?
Okay, looks like somebody had briefed you on all the speeches that I give in space conferences and talk about what we need to do. So these are very good cues for me to talk about. A little bit of reading, yes. So see, I normally talk about 5 or 6 things that need to happen for space sector to become big. Demand we talked about, that was number 1. Investment we talked about, that was number 2. Ecosystem we talked about, number 3. Technology we talked about. The last is skill. Not the last, but there's one more. I don't know if you have it in your notes. The skill. So skill is, again, first of all, many people will not realize that ISRO has a treasure of space skill. Okay? There are 13,000 science and technology people who are working in ISRO. And I come from outside, not a space person, come from automotive industry. And I am absolutely thoroughly impressed with the quality of these people and the commitment that they have to science, technology, and to the space sector. But what is more important is that since the retirement age in India, especially in government, is only 60 years, there are a whole bunch of retired people who have many years of sort of energy left to provide that skill to private sector. And now private sector is beginning to tap into this skill in a very big way. If you go to any startup, they will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 retired ISRO experts with them, either advisor or as employees, and they become their mentors and handholders. Third thing, so this is coming from the top. Third thing coming from the ground is InSpace is working with universities to set up degree in space, either courses or bunch of courses or a degree in space. And at least 8 to 10 universities now have signed up to start doing that. AICTE has approved a curriculum through InSpace for the space program. So that is also beginning. And then we also are providing short skill development courses to startups using experts from ISRO. And they come in and provide very good sort of focused thing, let's say something on satellite design. Someday it will be about Earth observation or something like that. So we are attacking it from many different fronts, and we'll solve the problem.
Right. NASA's Commercial Orbiter Transport System, or COTS, is a great example. Are there plans as we approach, the more private investment in space to look at something like that model here in India? The NASA's Commercial Orbiter Transport System, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that has been a fairly successful
Commercial operator?
Orbiter Transport System, NASA, that NASA has.
You mean space
NASA's
station?
Yes, commercial orbital transportation services that they have.
Transportation service, I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to, but no, transportation system at least we are not working on right now. But let me talk about what is being talked about. We just now talked mostly about private sector, but what ISRO is doing is what will happen in the next 10 years or next 15 years is perhaps more than what has happened in the last 60 years. In terms of what ISRO is doing, because now ISRO is in some sense freed from the day-to-day activity of space and let private sector do it. They are focusing more on the big stuff. Okay, you have probably heard about Chandrayaan 4. That will happen, I think, in 2027 or 28, where we have our plans to go beyond what we did Chandrayaan 3. You know about the human space flight. That will probably happen in about 2 years. We have announced the Indian space station that is committed for 2035. We have announced that there will be manned Indian on the moon. That is announced for 2040. So we have some very specific, very aspirational goals that we have, even for the purpose of what we do in the technical side of it. And one thing that I just want to add is that since we talked about the economy, InSpace has released a 10-year decadal vision for space economy, okay, where we plan to take the space sector from $8 billion today to $44 billion by 2033. This was announced last year. And there we have very detailed planning that we have done on how we will achieve from 8 billion to 44 billion. So technology plays a role in it, and the commercial activity that we talked about plays a role on it.
Right. Also, when it comes to these ambitious goals that you were mentioning, whether it's Gaganyaan, whether it's a man or Indian on the moon, so on and so forth, how much of a role will the private sector have to play in this, or will they all be ISRO programs purely?
So say in private sector has been playing one role all along, okay, which is the role of being a vendor or a supplier to ISRO. Right? So if you say a rocket that takes Chandrayaan, the satellite with it, the rocket is 70% built by private sector. All the components come from private sector. ISRO does the assembly, just like automotive sector. Automotive sector, everything is done by suppliers. The OEM only does the assembly. Similarly, here also, everything is done by suppliers. So to that extent, the private sector will play a very big role. And because all these various programs, for example, right now, a large number of satellites are being ordered by the Defense Department for their purposes. I cannot give you the number. Out of which 60% will be built by the private sector, 40% will be built by ISRO, but even in that 40%, a big chunk of inputs will come from private sector, right? So again, a big role that they will play. But in terms of technology, I think at least in the foreseeable future, the technology that goes into these programs will come from ISRO. That is not to say that private sector is not developing technology. In fact, almost all the startups that are there in space are what you would call deep tech startups. None of them is doing e-commerce or aggregation or fintech. They're all deep tech startups, and none of them are just picking up technology off the shelf and using it. All of them are developing new technology. But what is required for these programs perhaps goes beyond what is being developed.
It's a very interesting point to make, because when it comes to defense and strategic aspects, we see that there's so much of competition in terms of sharing of technology. Yet when it comes to space, which is perhaps the pioneer when it comes to technologies, we are seeing cooperation between countries. For Gaganyaan, for instance, we have cooperated with Russia. There have been cooperations with the European Space Union. There's been cooperations with the USA. How do you see this going along? Because many say, the next aspect of strategic affairs could be space. There's a space command, for instance, in the United States. And what role and to what extent do you see private players playing a role? Because in the United States, the private sector has a huge role to play when it comes to defense and strategic matters.
So, see, United States started involving private sector strategically in space decades ago. Goes back to 1990 or maybe even before. India has started just now. I have no doubt that if you were to sit here and talk 20 years from now, India would be in a similar situation as USA is today, where the technical work will also be done by the private sector, advanced technology work. But what has to change is that government will have to directly sponsor the R&D work in private sector, because private sector will not do this kind of R&D work, and that same thing is true in USA. The SpaceX R&D work is supported by NASA in a very big way. I mentioned $5 to $6 billion worth of funding that NASA has given directly to SpaceX. Similar amount has been given to Boeing. The development of the space station is done by private sector, paid for by NASA through the government of USA. So private sector will come forward, do the R&D, but government will have to support it. How long will it take for us to reach the same level of cutting edge? I think we'll have to wait and see. The programs that ISRO is doing are cutting 10 years, 15 years, bit hard to say today. As I said, they're doing technology work. They're doing new technology development, but not something that requires billions of dollars of investment. And many of these programs that you see here requires that kind of investment, billions of dollars of investment.
Right. And the government has also announced some programs in this light. Recently, I think 1,000 crores was announced in the last budget. It was Finance Minister who announced a 1,000 crore fund to boost the space economy fivefold. Do you think that this in itself is a good start? More needs to be done?
Yeah, so since So Government of India is doing a lot. Okay, so first the space policy that I talked about, which opened up the space sector for the first time for the private sector to play in. Then opening up the FDI, which was very restricted in the space sector. Now it's opened, pretty much automatic route for everything. Third is creating any space, through which facilitating private sector. And fourth is coming out with many, many schemes. The 1,000 crore VC fund is the one that got the most sort of visibility. But there are many other schemes like this that we are working on right now that we have announced. Some of them we are announcing. The constellation that I talked about, the 12 satellites launched by private sector, is also part of a PPP model, where government is putting in about 300 crore plus to support the private sector. And the 1,000 crore VC fund is done primarily with one objective only, that is space sector being a deep tech sector, which is very high gestation period. Right now, the private money doesn't come in very easily in the space sector. So government said that we are going to put aside 1,000 crores to fund startups. This is not a grant. This is an equity funding, just like any other VC fund. So it's a VC fund being created from government money specifically to fund the startups in the space sector. And that hopefully will operationalize it within the next 3 to 4 months. And then many of the startups are looking forward to it and have that money come in.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pawan Goenka, for explaining all of that to us. And we certainly hope that with the private sector coming in, the space sector has a lot more successes at its hand. Thank you so much, sir.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Dr. Goenka and Madhav, thank you.